Performance evaluation. Personnel economics helps us anticipate how strategic, self-interested employees might behave in various situations. This includes the performance evaluation process. Let's focus on the manager, supervisor, or boss who is responsible for conducting performance reviews. They are likely reviewing at least some workers who have strong views about how well they have performed.
You are going to give me this raise. I deserve this raise. Yes! 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 Ah! The least you can do is keep my salary consistent with inflation. Ah! Yes! Why are you going to give me this raise? Why? Because I'm awesome! I am awesome!
Also, self-interested workers are expected to use information strategically to make themselves look as good as possible, similar to what we'd expect in the recruitment and selection process. In the performance appraisal process, managers also have their own concerns, including having different roles and their own goals and desired rewards.
Today, I'm doing our staff appraisals, and some people can get a little bit nervous about that because they think they're, walking the long mile to put their head on the block, which is wrong. They fill out a form in advance, and they don't only sort of list their strengths and weaknesses, but also mine as a boss. So it's a chance for them to tell me where we're going wrong, and we can, it's very much an opportunity. To
separate the wheat from the chaff.
Well, no, that sounds bad. It's not a witch hunt. We're not trying to find out who the worst people are.
Well, we know who they are already.
Well, no.
I've written them on my form.
You shouldn't have written them on your form.
Look, I've underlined the worst ones.
Well, you're missing the point. Yeah.
Oh, David.
Here he is. Tim Canterbury. Good man. The Canterbury Tales. Can I just... If we're facing in the right direction, all we have to do is keep on walking.
Yep, very nice. You're quite a philosopher.
Well, it's just that I think our greatest glory is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall.
Are you reading these?
Am I what?
Reading the quotes?
Sort of. It doesn't...
Right. Confucius. Well, Bernard
Doesn't
Shaw.
matter who said them first. I am passing on my wisdom to you. And don't tell those I've just been
Am I going to?
reading it. It's an insight.
In addition to a manager's goals of how they want to be seen by their subordinates, they will also be concerned with how they are seen and rewarded by their own boss. So putting the employee's expectations and other behaviors together with the manager's concerns, performance evaluation for a manager is a work activity with various costs and benefits. This sounds like other personnel economics problems, and through a personnel economics lens, we can think about predicting how a self-interested manager conducts performance evaluations by considering their incentives. Partly this is a question of effort. If conducting performance appraisals is seen as a disutility, then managers are expected to devote effort to this task up to the point where the marginal cost of their effort on this task equals the marginal benefit. This is a form of a multitask incentive problem, and if managers perceive low rewards relative to the cost, we'd expect them to not devote much effort to performance evaluation. But we can also consider a manager's incentives for giving specific ratings to their subordinates. There are costs and benefits to different ratings, so personnel economics predicts that self-interested managers will optimize by giving a rating such that their marginal cost of a rating equals the marginal benefit of that rating. But is this expected to produce an accurate rating of a subordinate's performance, which is what the organization wants, or a rating affected by the manager's self-interest? If a manager bears some personal cost of a rating, for example, dealing with an employee who is unhappy with their rating, and/or receives some personal benefits, such as looking good to their boss when it looks like their employees are all high performers, then an optimizing manager is predicted to give a rating different from the employee's actual performance level. That is, optimizing behavior among managers predicts ratings of employees shaped by a manager's own interest. This is a form of a principal-agent problem because a self-interested manager doesn't necessarily act in the organization's interest. Let's look more carefully at how self-interested ratings might arise. Start with the personal costs to the manager. Not costs in monetary terms, but in terms of stress, personal discomfort, and time. We can graph a relationship between the value of the rating given to a subordinate on the x-axis and the cost to the manager on the y-axis. It's useful to think of this relative to the worker's accurate performance rating denoted by R accurate. One type of cost might be an inaccuracy cost, in which a manager feels guilty about giving an inaccurate rating. So there's no cost when they give an accurate rating, small levels of discomfort for ratings a little above or below the accurate rating, and greater levels of stress if they give a rating that is farther from the accurate rating. The U-shaped curve represents the level of cost, not marginal cost, but note this means that the marginal cost is negative to the left of R accurate because in that range a small increase in the rating lowers the manager's cost. Also note that this inaccuracy cost pushes the manager toward an accurate rating, which is what the organization wants. But there are other costs and benefits that may push a manager away from giving an accurate rating. One such cost is a low ratings cost. An employee who receives a low rating might complain and be angry. Imagine having to deal with Dwight in the I'm awesome clip at the start of the animation if he gets a bad review. This can be stressful and time-consuming for the manager. This is expected to be most costly for low ratings and least costly for high ratings, as shown by this line. This line again represents the level of cost associated with each rating, and its declining slope implies that the manager's marginal cost is negative for the entire range of possible ratings because a small increase in a rating decreases the manager's low rating cost. Of particular importance is that this cost is not expected to be zero at or slightly above an accurate rating because even some employees who receive an accurate rating might complain or be upset because they believe they deserved a higher rating. We can combine these two cost curves to get a total cost curve for the manager. At R accurate, the total cost equals the low rating cost because the inaccurate cost at that point is zero. To the left, total costs are higher because of the two components. To the right, total costs decline for a bit because the decline in the low rating cost is more important than the increase in the inaccuracy cost. But at R min cost, the increase in the inaccuracy cost becomes larger than the decrease in the low rating cost, so costs increase with ratings higher than R min cost. Note carefully that this means that the manager's marginal cost is negative until R min cost. If a manager gives a performance rating to minimize their own cost, we'd expect them to give a rating of R min cost, which is higher than R accurate. So an employee who really deserves a 3.75 rating on a 5-point scale might actually receive a 4, for example. But this ignores the benefit side of the manager's optimization problem. So let's first convert the total cost curve to marginal cost. The key here is that marginal costs are negative until R min cost, and only for ratings higher than R min cost does a higher rating increase the manager's stress and time cost. But subordinate ratings might also yield personal benefits for the manager. In particular, the manager might look better to their boss if their employees all appear to be doing well. So let's add a marginal benefit curve to this graph, and we'll have it slope downwards consistent with diminishing marginal returns. Economic theory then predicts that an optimizing self-interested manager will assign performance ratings to subordinates where the manager's marginal cost equals their marginal benefit. Notably, the cost and benefit profiles described here lead to the prediction that the self-interested rating of an employee is above the accurate rating level that the employee deserves. In other words, self-interested managerial behavior is predicted to lead to ratings inflation. Again, this is a form of a principal-agent problem in that the manager is acting in their own self-interest to the detriment of the organization. This is bad for the organization because it might be overcompensating employees and finding it difficult to identify the right people to promote. It also deprives workers of valuable feedback. Moreover, research has shown that ratings inflation can be demotivating for workers. This is similar to other results we've seen in this course where weakening the connection between effort and rewards can be demotivating for economically oriented workers. What happens if a manager expects a worker to cause them even more time or stress if they are given a low rating? This makes the low rating cost curve steeper, which makes the total cost curve steeper, shifting the marginal cost curve to the right, because a steeper curve means the reduction in cost from increased ratings is even greater. This leads to even higher predicted ratings. This should make intuitive sense. If a manager fears the time and stress costs of a lower rating, then they'll be expected to give a higher rating. So how can an organization reduce ratings inflation? As this is a form of a principal-agent problem, the usual solutions apply, especially monitoring and/or incentives. For example, make sure the manager is being rewarded for thorough and accurate performance appraisals. Another possibility is to limit the manager's options. A leading example of this is using a forced distribution method for performance reviews. In this approach, each ranking is limited to a fixed proportion. For example, 10% of workers must get the lowest rating. How does this change the manager's calculation? A forced distribution means that inaccurate ratings above the accurate rating are much more costly because giving someone too high of a rating prevents the manager from giving a high performer a high rating. So let's look at the marginal cost and marginal benefit graph again. In effect, the sharp increase in the inaccurate rating cost means that the marginal cost of increased ratings jumps significantly at the accurate rating score. So now managers rate individuals accurately. If they gave a rating lower than R accurate, the marginal benefit would be greater than the marginal cost, so they should give a higher rating. But for ratings higher than R accurate, the marginal cost is greater than the marginal benefit, so they should give a lower rating. So the optimal rating is an accurate rating. But managers are not happy because for them, marginal cost is greater than the marginal benefit at R accurate. Intuitively, managers don't like forced distributions because it's hard to decide on close calls and it's stressful to force some workers into the at-risk lowest category. Note that everything in this animation to this point has assumed that a manager knows an employee's true performance level, what we've been denoting by R accurate. And we've explored how the actual rating given to an employee might deviate from this accurate rating because of the manager's self-interest. But it should be acknowledged that a worker's actual rating could deviate from their true performance level because of managerial bias. In standard economic thought, it's common to theorize discrimination on the basis of taste or imperfect information. Taste-based discrimination is outright prejudice and bias against certain groups of people. In the context of performance reviews, a manager with a taste for discrimination, that is, a racist, sexist, or other-ist manager, would be expected to give lower performance ratings to members of groups that the manager is prejudiced against. In theory, taste-based discrimination should be competed away because those who do not discriminate will have an advantage. For example, managers who do not discriminate should be able to attract high-performing women or people of color to work for them. But reality is not so simple. Imperfect information has been theorized to result in what's labeled statistical discrimination, when people use perceived group characteristics to make judgments in the absence of information about a specific person. For example, a manager might assume a female subordinate is unable to be fully committed to her career because of a belief that this is true for most women because of caregiving responsibilities. In the context of performance reviews, managers should not need to resort to such generalities because they should observe a person's actual performance. But if a manager does behave this way, lower performance ratings for members of certain groups could be expected. Note also that the theory of statistical discrimination is often portrayed as benign, at least in its intent, but it's actually ultimately rooted in prejudice, just like taste-based discrimination, because it's based on racist and sexist beliefs that race and gender are acceptable indicators of individual qualities and that negative characteristics are more likely to be attached to women, blacks, and other groups. Even though managers should be able to better observe individual performance than in some other contexts, for example, hiring a new employee, and should therefore be able to avoid statistical discrimination, the end result might be the same because of implicit biases. That is, stereotypes about women, people of color, the disabled, and other groups can impact our judgments and assessments. A man might be characterized as assertive, whereas the same behaviors in a woman might be described more negatively as aggressive. Economic approaches need to do better in recognizing the widespread nature of implicit biases. Based on any three of these reasons, then, subjective performance appraisals might discriminate against certain groups, with the most obvious implication being that their appraisal scores would be lower even when their performance is equal to or better than someone in the favored group. This can then perpetuate salary differentials and uneven promotion opportunities. This concern is more important than ratings inflation, and organizations need to combat this even without being concerned with ratings inflation. I'll say it again. Biased and discriminatory appraisals are a more significant concern than ratings inflation, and organizations need to address this even without being concerned with ratings inflation. But let's return to our graph and see how we can add in biased managers. I'll represent the favored group with various shades of blue. So here is a re-representation of the ratings inflation diagram for the favored group. Let's add shades of orange to represent a group that's discriminated against. Let's take a member of that group who has actual performance R accurate. but whether because of explicit prejudice or implicit biases, the manager sees their performance as deserving a lower rating, which I'll denote by R biased. This changes the location of the manager's inaccuracy cost curve and thus changes the marginal cost curve, leading to a rating that is inflated, but it's still less than the rating received by the equivalent performer in the preferred group. So even with ratings inflation, we should expect members of a discriminated group to receive lower ratings, holding actual performance constant. But prejudice or implicit bias might also magnify the problem of ratings inflation. As an extreme case, suppose a biased manager doesn't care about complaints from the marginalized group and doesn't feel guilty about ratings lower than what they see as the deserved level. Then the marginal cost of increased ratings is zero until R biased, where it then increases because it bothers a prejudiced manager to give higher rating. Moreover, suppose the prejudiced manager discounts the perceived benefits of higher ratings to the marginalized group, including rejecting all benefits for ratings that are above what they see as the deserved level. This changes the marginal benefits curve. So when an optimizing manager rates an employee based on equating the manager's marginal cost and marginal benefit, the manager gives workers in the discriminated against group the biased rating. This is a long way of saying that a biased manager might not only downgrade someone's performance, captured by R biased, but they might also not inflate that rating. So the difference between what someone in the favored group receives, that is blue R star, and what an equivalent performer in the discriminated group receives is even larger. In summary, performance appraisals are costly for managers, and we can therefore ask how self-interested managers will optimize their behavior. Marginal analysis predicts that managers will devote effort to performance appraisals only to the extent that this effort is rewarded. Moreover, marginal analysis predicts ratings inflation. But what to do with that free space in the middle of the screen? How about some lessons to conclude? First, if managers are not devoting the amount of attention to conducting performance reviews that the organization desires, it should examine the incentives that managers have to do performance reviews compared to other tasks. That is, the organization should see this as a multitask incentive problem. Second, organizations should be aware that self-interested managers might inflate performance ratings in subjective performance appraisals because of their own personal costs and benefits. Organizations should be intentional about putting systems in place to help generate accurate evaluations. Managers need to be trained and held accountable. Other strategies like calibration committees can also help reduce rating inflation. And perhaps most importantly, organizations need to address explicit and implicit biases, not only in the performance evaluation process, but throughout all of the organization's processes. The concepts of self-interest, marginal cost, and marginal benefit can be useful for understanding why managers dislike doing performance appraisals, and for understanding the performance ratings that managers give their employees. Overall then, looking at performance evaluation through a personnel economics lens reinforces the broad applicability of economic theorizing to HR issues within organizations.